Imagine a world where no one is left behind. A world where everyone has the opportunity to get a job with decent working conditions. The global goals and the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development is a global political commitment to such a world. The agenda contains 17 goals and 169 sub-goals. Out of the 17 ambitious goals, however, very few specifically mention people with disabilities. At the same time, the agenda undoubtedly entails a clear mission for all the countries of the world to create increased participation for people with disability in the labor market. In the Nordic countries, a new Nordic vision sets the goals that in 10 years the Nordic countries should be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world, with inclusion and equality throughout the Nordic countries. So how can new technology, artificial intelligence, and digitalization help governments across the globe to fulfill these rights? Which measures are required to include people with disabilities in the labor market? Welcome to this webinar, How Can Future Workplaces Work Better for People with Disabilities? It's a half-day conference where some of the leading researchers in the world will give us their insights on these issues. My name is Hanna Gerdes. I'm a human rights lawyer and educator, and I'm the founder of Hanna and Goliath Law and Education. And today I've been given the privilege to moderate this important webinar. This seminar will end at 12 o'clock, and we will have two short breaks, one at 9:55 and one at 10:55. Here in the studio, it's only me actually and Lars Lindberg that I will introduce very shortly, and also our technical staff. We've tried to keep the participation here in the studio to as few people as possible because of Corona, of course. However, with us today from Helsinki, we have a part of our team, and it's Jessica Gustafsson. Hi, Jessica. Nice to see you. Hi. Jessica is a communication advisor at the Nordic Welfare Center, and she will be the one replying to you to your questions in the chat, and she will also provide you with information by sending out links during the webinar. So all other speakers and panelists today, they will actually be joining us from different parts of the Nordic countries and actually from the world through Zoom. And during the course of the day, you will be able to ask questions to the panelists, and we really encourage you to do this. So please ask questions. You can give comments, you can ask questions, and you can share your thoughts in the chat function. And this chat function is found in the toolbar in the Zoom program. And please note that you can send messages both so it actually is to everybody who are following this webinar today, or specifically just to the panelists, or specifically to the technical staff. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be published later on the Nordic Welfare Center's YouTube channel. And we will edit it and we will subtitle the recordings. Written interpretation is available and can be activated by clicking on the CC closed caption function in the toolbar. You are also able to choose the size of the texting in the CC settings. If you have any kind of technical challenges, please write privately in the chat to our technical support that will, of course, answer you promptly. We would also like you to inform you that the participants, you will not be able to turn on your sound or your video. And we would actually like to start off directly with some input from all of you listening, because today you are almost 200 people joining us at this webinar. So we would like to know some things about you. So we would like to start off by asking you, where are you joining us from? Which country or which part of the globe? So I think in a short while you will have this kind of poll. So please answer the poll and let us know, where are you joining us from? And then there will also be another question, because we are very interested in which sector do you work with? Which sector do you work with? Are you also a researcher? Do you work for the government or perhaps for an international organization? Are you here listening as a private person? So please tell us a little more about you. Where are you joining us from and which sector do you work in? And so while you are now answering this, I will shortly and briefly introduce you and hand over to Lars Lindberg. Lars is the senior advisor at the Nordic Welfare Center, and he has a very long experience of working with disability policy in Sweden. Amongst many things, Lars has worked at the Ministry of Social Affairs with responsibility for coordinating disability policies and as the head of the Accessibility Center at Disability Ombudsman. And Lars will now give you some brief notes on the reason that we are gathered here today and about the project that he is heading. So I hand over to you, Lars.
Thank you, Hanna. Yes, as a project manager, I also want to welcome everybody to this exciting webinar that we have in front of us. It is really gratifying to see that so many have signed up. This webinar is a part of our project that started a year ago. This is about the future of working life for people with disability and in what way new digital and technologies and other solutions can increase inclusion in working life. Most of you are probably well aware that this is a big challenge for the future. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenge was great for many with disabilities, both to enter the labor market and to establish and to develop in the same way as others. Few of us know what the long-term consequences will be of the pandemic, what the effect will be and the consequence on the economy. But one thing is clear, there is a great risk that the gap will grow even more between those who have and those who don't have a disability. We also know that a crisis can also lead to gain new perspectives and create new solutions. The working life we have today is for many radically different compared to what we had a year ago. Is there in the new normal with digitalization and teleworking the answer to the flexible working life that many have seen as an important prerequisite for people with disability to be fully included? What will last after this time and what will we have learned? Then there are also some other questions we need to ask. For example, in what way will the ongoing automation of working life have for workers with disabilities? Some of these questions we will get into today, but they also needed to be raised in other contexts as well. The project is run by the Nordic Welfare Center, which is an institution under the Nordic Council of Ministers Social and Health sector. Our mission is to contribute to the development of welfare initiatives in the Nordic region. The project is commissioned by the Nordic Labour Market Committee, whose task is to enhance and promote Nordic cooperation on employment policy and research, as well as to initiate projects concerning the development and modernization of labour market policy in the Nordic countries. The project consists of 4 parts: to produce a compilation of knowledge about the research and the knowledge that exists in the field. And we should also point out the need for research and innovation. This will today be presented by Professor Jan Goliath and Torfinn Johansson. The compilation will also be published in the beginning of early next year. We will produce a sample collection of digital and technical solutions that are implemented in the Nordic countries. A toolbox for implementation of these solutions will be developed, and which also be a support for employers, employees, and professionals who work with assistive technologies and workplace adaptation. The toolbox will also be published at the beginning of the next year. And fourth, disseminate information. This webinar is a part of this, and we will also in the spring have the online conference where we go deeper in the issues of the future of work and life for people with disabilities. And you all will receive an invitation later by email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lars. I actually had the chance to quickly just look at the questions we asked, and there seems to be people joining us from all Nordic countries and also from Europe, but also outside of Europe. So that's really interesting. And there's a lot of people from the private sector, there's a lot of people from academia, there's a lot of people from the public sector, from NGOs. So we are quite a multiple crowd here today. So I have an important question for you. What are your expectations of this webinar that we are going to listen to today? What are your expectations?
Yes, there's a lot of exciting speakers we will listen to. I think that new technologies, historically, we know can create both new opportunities to be a door opener, but can also create barriers. And I think with increased knowledge, I think we will be better prepared to choose a strategy for the future. And I hope this, and I think this webinar will be a step into that direction. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Lars. As Lars said, we have a lot of really interesting speakers with us today. And I would like to now start off by introducing the first speaker of today, and that is Stefan Trömmel. Stefan has been a senior disability specialist for the International Labour Organization since 2013. Hi, Stefan. So I see you now. Hi, nice to see you. And Stefan was previously executive director of the International Disability Alliance and was actively involved in the negotiation process on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And today, Stefan will be speaking about making the future of work inclusive of persons for persons with disability. So I hand over to you, Stefan. It's going to be really interesting listening to you.
Thank you very much, Hanna, and thank you to the Nordic Welfare Center for this invitation, and congratulations to this initiative, because it's exactly these type of events that are needed in the current circumstances to, as Lars was saying, to ensure that people with disabilities have better opportunities in the future labor market than they have nowadays, and that is definitely not a given, and we need to work towards that. I will be presenting the main conclusions and recommendations from a report we launched last November at a conference we organized in Geneva in the headquarters of the International Labour Organization under the title, Making the Future of Work Inclusive of Persons with Disabilities. And what we tried to do with that report and that conference was to look at the generally accepted trends of the labor market through a disability lens, no? To try to ensure that in these discussions that have been happening and will continue to happen, the disability perspective is present. And at the same time also to bring, like you're doing today, to the disability, but also to the business and disability community, these future of work discussions, just to make sure that we are adapting our way of working to these changes. Our conference had been preceded by a big conference of the ILO, or annual conference, where we adopted a centenary declaration on the future of work, and which insists on a human-centered approach and refers explicitly to the need to ensure equal opportunities and treatment of persons with disabilities. That's a very important statement, but again, something that we need to construct and to build. So as I said, I will share the main conclusions and recommendations that came from this report, which is a pre-COVID-19 report. And of course, I will also, as much as possible, also try to say how much those conclusions and recommendations have been affected by the current situation. Now, there are 5 main recommendations that come out of the report, and I will present them and develop them a bit. The first one is about the recognition that we are looking at new forms of employment and employment relations, which needs to take into account the disability perspective. In the ILO context, we speak about non-standard forms of employment. So it's just this recognition that what we were perhaps used to, at least in my age group, that we have a sort of a career. Once we get into the labor markets, there's a rather stable relationship with not necessarily one employer, but several employers, but always in a sort of formal relationship. Well, this is a situation that is changing. It's still the prevalent situation in a developed country context, but it is changing. The percentage of non-standard forms of employment is increasing, which has its pros and cons. It has, of course, a lot of concerns when you look at it from a labor law point of view. We speak about the platform economy, we speak about the gig economy, which is still rather small in percentage, but definitely rapidly increasing. Surprisingly enough, in our report, while we were speaking about some of these new forms, telework was not much addressed. If we would have known what was coming, of course, we would have paid more attention to something that has become our daily current reality, for most of us, but also something that definitely will stay with us in a much more pronounced way than in the past. Not perhaps in the same way as right now, but definitely we are moving. And I think in the Nordic context, you were already well ahead to others. But in my context, here in Switzerland, telework was something done rather exceptional. You know? And it's clear that this now will become much more the norm and not the exception. And of course, that means that we need to look at telework dimension and all its angles through a disability perspective and through the diversity of the disability perspective. As we all know, people with disabilities are a very diverse community, and some can more easily adjust to these conditions. For others, it's more complicated. And I think we need to pay particular attention to those where telework is either not an option or whether it would require additional efforts to ensure that. It's clear also that legislation needs to adapt to these new situations. We have still very often labor legislation that is more based on old forms, on the more standard forms of employment. We need now to develop legislation, foresee what is the non-discrimination angle of these new forms of employment. How can we, if we're going to revise the telework legislation, and we're seeing that happening in a number of countries, what is the disability angle in that context? And another very important and not easy element that needs to be adjusted to these new forms, new employment relations, is social protection. Again, we were used to a social protection system, at least in OECD countries, where, well, you were in a labor relationship throughout your life, you were contributing to your pension, you were mostly in the labor market, sometimes perhaps with a few breaks and all that. But all that is now changing with this new form of relation. And perhaps there's also the opportunity of correcting some of the very often badly designed social protection systems from a disability inclusion perspective. You know, sometimes there are things that are done in the context of social protection which are not always helping persons with disabilities to find a job. So that is the first area, these new forms of employment and how to look at those that are becoming more and more prevalent through a disability perspective. The second area that we addressed in our report was about skills development and lifelong learning to be made inclusive of persons with disabilities. In a to some extent similar notion as before, the other big change that we are seeing happening is that this whole idea that you sort of acquire skills, you learn something, you go to university, and with that you go into the labor market, and with those skills, with a few adjustments, you can sort of make your career. Again, that is changing. What we are seeing is that this whole concept of lifelong learning, which we already had addressed, is becoming a much more a need. We can no longer expect that that the skills that we have now will continue to be relevant in the near future. We know that these studies that have been done by different organizations, World Economic Forum and others, these messages that most of the jobs that exist nowadays will no longer exist, and half of the jobs in 10 years' time are jobs that almost don't exist nowadays. No? That just means we need to permanently think how we ensure that the population continues to have the skills that are demanded by the labor market. And of course, poses additional challenges and opportunities, I would say, for persons with disabilities. It's about upskilling. It's about sometimes completely reskilling, because just the job that people have is no longer relevant. And of course, to some extent, although we don't have very good statistics, again, of where people with disabilities are doing their jobs, at least when you look at it from a global perspective, it's clear that we feel that people with disabilities are probably more in jobs that are more in risk of being of disappearing or being fundamentally redesigned. So there's a huge need to look at that situation and to ensure that people with disabilities are benefiting from these upskilling and reskilling. And of course, also for those that are sort of starting to enter the labor market, we need to ensure, and I'll come back to that, that people with disabilities have good access to digital skills, which is clearly one of the key elements in the future. And I think there are some similarities here. And our centenary declaration in the ILO addresses, in fact, older workers and workers with disabilities in the same paragraph. I think there are some similarities there, not only because, as you know, disability prevalence increases with age, so many of the older workers would also have some form of activity limitation, but I think there are some issues there that we need to look and perhaps combine. So that was the second big area, the issue of lifelong learning and skills development. A third one is universal design, to be fully embedded in the development of all new infrastructure, products and services. I would say nothing new. I mean, we've been pushing for that for many, many years, but I think it's becoming even more a need at this stage. The speed of change in which new products and services are being developed. Just think of mobile phones and version XXX, and the year after, half a year later, a new version comes in. If from the outset, these new products and services are not taking into account the situation of persons with disabilities as well as possible, by the moment you've retrofitted that new product and service to make it inclusive of persons with disability, the new version will already be out. So you're really always running behind a train, unless that train is from the beginning designed in an accessible way. And we are seeing there's a lot of hope there. I mean, many of the companies that are leading products and services in the IT sector are doing a good job in terms of accessible software, have realized that is part of their sustainability. It's products that are accessible for people with disabilities are usually better for everybody. And we've also seen in this year in particular, we have seen the flourishing of platforms that we didn't even know the name, that have increased exponentially in terms of not only the market value, but also just the number. And many of them have had already, or many of them have included very quickly good accessibility features like the ones that we're using here today in terms of closed captioning, of course, the provision of international sign. I mean, and just the possibility of navigating through those platforms, for instance, with the screen reader. So a lot of progress has been done. But still more needs to be done. We have, I think at European level, it's very important that we have a European standard that defines the process that organizations need to follow to ensure that when they come up with new products and services, they meet Design for All universal design standards. Public procurement needs to play, I would say, an even more active role than it has displayed in the past to promote universal design. But at the same time, we're still seeing, and we are starting to look a bit into that with some partner organizations, that there are many accessible online processes that organizations and companies use, which are not accessible to persons with disabilities. We are seeing the flourishing of digital recruitment platforms, I would say complementing the work perhaps of public employment services and private employment services. Again, if we don't ensure that these platforms are fully inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities, we are creating new barriers for persons with disabilities, or at least for some of them to enter the labor market. So that is the third area. The fourth area that we addressed in the report, and also we had a number of interesting panel discussions at our conference, is the whole area of assistive technologies. And what we were saying is basically assistive technologies, and existing ones and newly developed ones, need to be made affordable and available. probably not such a big issue in the Nordic context, but when you look at it from a developing country perspective, which is what we have to do also as ILO, there are huge challenges in terms of making available and affordable, very, very basic assistive technologies, which we take just for granted in our context. It's clear that there are huge potentials there we're seeing the role that artificial intelligence can play in complementing the skills of persons with disabilities, with a lot of different applications coming up new to the market every month, I would even say. At the same time, we're also seeing, and we're working a bit on that with some partners, we are seeing recruitment software that is powered by artificial intelligence, which claims to sort of take away some of the human bias that a recruitment process can include. And in fact, it's doing the contrary. It is basically embedding in a more systematic way elements that lead to the exclusion of persons with disabilities, because sometimes these softwares would not accommodate for a different way that a person with autism or a person who stammers, or a person who needs a sign language interpreter, or a person who is blind would interact, for instance, with the camera. So there's a huge problem there which we need to address. But as I said, looking at it from a developing country context, the affordability and availability of assistive technologies is an issue. I think it's important there. Countries like yourself, where you're investing a lot of, supporting a lot developing countries through your development assistance, it's important to make that, and I know some of you are doing it, to make that a priority, to really make sure that in a developing country context, these very basic assistive technologies are fully accessible. We also see very interesting new modalities. As you know, we have the modality of supported employment, which is very often used as a modality for persons with intellectual disabilities. We are seeing examples coming from the US, for instance, where we are seeing the remote use, how the remote support can complement, especially in a situation where job coaches can perhaps not go to the premises of a company. There's a telework context. But I think some of these new modalities, very creative ones, I think probably will stay with us and will make certain solutions perhaps even more sustainable and even more effective. So interesting things happening in that context, but at the same time also concerns that if we don't make more efforts to ensure that there is, for instance, public support available for the research and development, but even more importantly, I would say public support to make sure that the products that exist reach those that need them. That was the fourth area. The fifth area we addressed were measures to include persons with disabilities in growing and developing areas of the economy. And when looking at our report again, I was surprised, in fact, to see that, well, of course, we had mentioned the digital economy. It was mentioned in passing, I would say. I'll come back to that immediately. And in fact, the area that we more significantly addressed as a potential growth area is the green economy, what we call it in the ILO context, the just transition from a carbon-intensive economy to a low-carbon economy. And of course, there are jobs that are being lost there, but also jobs that will be created there. And the whole point was we need to ensure that persons with disabilities get their fair share of these new, what we call green jobs in the ILO context. And I think that still remains relevant. I mean, many of the messages that we hear, and Hanna, you spoke about the Sustainable Development Goals, it's also clear, and the messages coming out from all global leaders is that the way out of the current crisis not only needs to be digital, but it also needs to be a green strategy. Now, very good French. But now let me look now in my final 5 minutes. Let me look at the impact of COVID-19. But it's fair to say that when COVID-19 came, the first reaction was, of course, we were extremely concerned. And already very early on, clear messages coming out also of the UN at the highest level in terms of the concerns about people with disabilities being among those most hardly impacted by the COVID. And not only in the health context, which has happened in older persons institutions, disability institutions, we have seen terrible situations, but also the impact it has or could have in terms of employment and jobs. No? And a clear message coming out from the UN, also from the ILO, that we need to make sure that the response to the crisis needs to be a disability inclusive response. With saying at the same time that that the crisis caught us at a moment where we were a bit better prepared to ensure a disability inclusive response than, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago. We have now a UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We have these Sustainable Development Goals that Hanna was reminding us with explicit references to persons with disabilities. We have a private sector that is much more committed and engaged. Still not enough, or not enough companies, but those that are engaged are engaging much more now than in the past. So we were in a better situation now than if this would have happened 15 years ago. Now, the ILO organized a big conference in June, looking at COVID-19 and the world of work, and digitalization as a key element in the strategy to respond to the crisis was mentioned, I would say, by almost every head of state, prime minister, minister of employment that spoke at that. So, and as we know, we were reminded that there was already before the crisis, there was a mismatch in many countries on digital jobs, needs for cybersecurity professional, big data analysts. Very often companies were struggling to find professionals in those jobs. And of course, if digitalization is the way out of the crisis, or a key strategy the way out of the crisis, from a disability perspective, the message is very clear. What do we need to do to ensure that a significant part of these new jobs or redesigned jobs benefit persons with disabilities? And we are seeing interesting initiatives, very small ones. I mean, we have a very interesting initiative of which we are a partner of training persons with disabilities to become cybersecurity professionals. Not only in the US where it started, but also now we are implementing it in Kenya, Ethiopia, Bangladesh. So very interesting initiatives, but very small. At the same time, we see that many of the big initiatives, public initiatives, global initiatives, some initiatives led by large companies, are focusing on on youth, focusing on women. All that is perfect, but always it seems that youth does not include youth with disabilities, women does not include women with disabilities. No? So all these big initiatives seem to lack an adequate attention to disability inclusion. We have seen the European digital strategy, which has been designed with scarce references, at least explicit references to persons with disabilities. And I think we need to be reminded that there is a digital gap. That's the starting position of persons with disabilities. They have, for a number of reasons, and if you look at it from a developing country perspective, even more, there is a gap in access to technology. There is a gap in access to digital skills. We have seen the impact it has had, COVID-19 has had, in terms of exclusion from education, from training, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, we are seeing interesting initiatives. The mobile phone industry is about to adopt in the coming days some principles to promote the use of mobile phones in a developing country context as a key vehicle for assistive technologies. As we know, very, very often mobile phones can do things which in the past could only be done by special separate devices, and now mobile phones play an important role in that. But again, we need to ensure access to that.
Stefan, thank you so much. Our time is actually running out. So I've been asked here to thank you very much. Do you want to say some final words, or?
Oh, just the final word is the big message is we need to build back better. That's a big message coming out of disability inclusion, out of the global discussions. The building back better needs to be disability inclusive. We need to address those problems we already had before. We need to address them now. We have the opportunity to address them better now. If we don't do that, there's a huge risk that persons with disabilities will be among the losers of the current context. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting listening. I want to actually ask you a question and perhaps start where you finished, because you finished off by speaking a bit about the pandemic. And I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, it's been a very particular year with the pandemic pushing broad digitalization in a faster pace than ever before. But could we also say that it's actually speeded up when it came to, inclusion on the labor market for people with disabilities? Can we see any kind of effects of that? What has happened now when it comes to, for the last 8 months? Has there been any difference?
Look, the first problem is that we don't have good statistics. I mean, the statistics we have seen in the US, they came up with some statistics where they were comparing the percentage of people that lost their job during COVID, and there was an over-representation of persons with disability in that context. But in general, we have not seen a lot of statistics. I don't know whether you have better statistics in the Nordic context. Interested to hear about it. I would say that our main concern is for people with disabilities that are working in small and medium enterprises, that are working in the informal economy, in developing country context. There, I think the impact has been very large. What we see from the private sector, and we work a lot with, we have a global business and disability network. We work with large global companies committed to disability inclusion, also in developing country context. We've seen that after a certain moment where we're all sort of readjusting to the new situation and we're a bit lost, the whole issue of diversity and inclusion, or disability inclusion, has picked up again. And in that context, let's say in the context of more formal employment within larger groups, I would say that we might even see a sort of a reactivation of disability inclusion, new opportunities coming up there. But I'm concerned about what is happening outside that, let's say, more established area.
So I want to ask you one thing more about that, because one of the lessons learned from, early economic crisis, at least, it's that people with disabilities usually have a more difficult time after the crisis as well, when it's over. And do you have any thoughts on that? What should be done to decrease the gap after the pandemic? Because now we're talking about, most countries are saying that in a couple of months we're having, at least starting to have a vaccine. What should we do when it comes to which political initiatives are needed?
Well, the first thing is to do things like you're doing today. We need to increase our efforts to visibilize the situation of persons with disabilities. While many of our efforts have always been about getting persons with disabilities into the labor market, those efforts remain valid. But at the same time, we also need to make a huge effort to ensure that people with disabilities that are in the labor market are not moved out of the labor market, because we know that there are statistics there that basically 1 out of 4 only that moves out of the labor market then makes it back in the immediate near future. And so I think we need to ensure that those that are in the labor market are not, let's say, allowed, or they're not pushed out of the labor market. It's fair to say that a previous crisis have had this slogan about last to get in and first to get out. No? We need to prevent them from happening. We need to increase. In the UN context, we speak about the socio-economic response plans of governments to the crisis. They need to have persons with disabilities as a priority group, both with targeted measures when needed, but also looking at all the mainstream measures, training, reskilling, the use of public procurement. All of these measures need to more effectively consider persons with disabilities.
So thank you, Stefan. I actually think we might have a question also for you from some of the people listening. I'm going to hand over to Jessica in Helsinki. Jessica? We'll see if she's there. Is she available? Okay, so then I want to really thank you so much, Stefan, for this. It's been really, really interesting. And now I would like to introduce Thomas Bredgaard, who is our next speaker today. Thomas is a professor at the Department of Politics and Society at Aalborg University. He's also a professor at the Karma Center for Labour Market Research and at the Danish Research Center on Disability and Employment. And Thomas will now be giving us some insights on barriers and bridges to labour market integration of people with disabilities. So there you are, Thomas. Nice to see you. So I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to share some of our recent findings from Denmark on a research project about the barriers and bridges that people with disabilities experience in terms of integrating on the labor market. So I'm just sharing my slides, and I hope that you are able to see them. So just last week, this book came out about disability and employment, from barriers to bridges. So we have kind of a double research question. So on the one hand, we would like to try and explain why people with disabilities have a lower employment rate than people without disabilities. And of course, there are some disabilities which are kind of incapacitating the individual and making it very difficult to work. But actually, many people with disabilities do have some capacities and do have skills and are underrepresented on the labor market. So they do experience some barriers, and that was a main objective of this research, to identify these barriers. And the second part of the project was about identifying bridges to the labor market. So how do we make the labor market more inclusive so that more people with disabilities are integrated on the labor markets? And our research project tried to take an integrated approach in which we study both the supply of labor, in this case people with mobility impairments on the Danish labor market, but also the demand for labor, so the experiences, the attitudes and the behavior of employers towards people with disabilities. And also very importantly, the third side or actor, the matching between demand and supply. In the Danish case, that is mainly done through the local job centers or the public employment services. So we try to take this integrated approach and understand how barriers exist in the supply, in the demand, as well as the matching. And we did representative surveys as well as interviews. So we use a mixed methods approach to study these issues. And in terms of theory, we build on theories of information asymmetry and disableism, because it is very clear that there are major information gaps on all three parties. And I should also mention that this project was financed by the Bevica Foundation, a Danish foundation targeting people with mobility impairments. So here you see the employment rates in Denmark again before the Corona crisis, and as Stefan already mentioned, we have inadequate statistics to really see how the Corona crisis is impacting on the employment of people with disabilities. But I share the concern that Stefan voiced, that the Corona crisis might actually severely impact the employment of people with disabilities. So in the Danish case, you find that there is quite a major gap between people with and without disabilities, and especially people with major disabilities. So we have statistics for the last 10 years or so. If you look at the red bar in the bottom, it shows the employment gap between people with and without disabilities. And this has been almost constant, around 30%. In the last number of years, from 2014, it has been declining due to the improving business cycle in Denmark, and also due to the fact that there's been some major reforms of disability policies, and especially the opportunities for people with disabilities to work in so-called flexible jobs. So flexible jobs are an example of supported employment in the Danish case. So I'll just move very quickly to some of our findings from the project, and due to the time limit here, I'll not be able to share a lot of figures and graphs and statistics, but I'll just encourage you to have a look at our book, in which you find a lot of tables and graphs and statistics. So here I'll just highlight some of the main barriers that we identified. And in terms of the relation between people with disabilities and the labor market, this supply side approach, of course, it's clear that the type of disability is very important. So in the Danish case, we find that people with mental disabilities have a very low employment rate, only about 30%, while people with mobility impairments have an employment rate around 55%, but still much lower than people without disabilities. And of course, the severity of the disability is also very important. In the Danish case, we have done surveys, yearly surveys by some of my colleagues, measuring or asking people about self-reported disability. And in this, about 20% of the Danish adult population say that they have a disability or long-term health issue. And about 50% of these, 10% in total, say that they have a major disability and health issue. Another important barrier is the education system. People with disability tend to have lower levels of education, and as Stefan mentioned, skills are very important in the new economy and adult vocational training as well. So people with disability have these education gaps, and also but we find that as people with disabilities get higher education, the gap is declining. So education is very important. Then in our project, we also try to identify self-confidence or self-efficacy. And unfortunately, we found that many people with mobility impairments have a lower self-confidence or self-esteem than people without disability. And we found a clear association to lower job search and employment rates. We also found that many employers asked people with disabilities to disclose their impairments already during the recruitment process. But when people with disabilities disclose their impairments, there's a high possibility or risk that they will be deselected by employers. So this question of disclosure is also quite a dilemma. We also found that job search and social networks are generally very important, but people with disabilities are more relying on the employment services and the job centers. And generally, employment services and job centers are a less efficient way of finding a job compared to social networks. People with disabilities in our study are found to have a smaller social network and are less inclined to use it. So that's another barrier. At the workplace level, it is very clear in the Danish case that there are quite inadequate information about disability, as well as the different support and compensation measures which are available. But employers lack knowledge about these programs. And we also did some vignette experiments to understand how employers are inclined to hire or not to hire people with disabilities. And we found in this experiment that disability really disqualifies. So if a person with disability searching for a job disclose that they have an impairment, there's a high risk that they'll not get the job. Accessibility and job functions, many employers also quite openly admitted that our workplace is not accessible and we don't have job functions for people with disabilities. I think sometimes we can challenge this idea that they don't have job functions and maybe encourage them to be a bit more creative. And we also found that there was a lack of cooperation between the workplaces and the employment services. In Denmark, we spend a lot of resources on active labor market policies, but they are not very well targeted at the people with disabilities. So in the Danish case, there's quite an inadequate identification of disabled job seekers. So there's no registration in the employment services, no systematic screening of disabilities in employment services. So there is a risk that people with disabilities, and especially invisible disabilities, are not identified in employment services. And that means that their needs are not catered for. So we conclude in this book that unfortunately, currently, the Danish, in the Danish case, there is an inability to match labor supply and demand. And as I so that's what you can read in this conclusion. Although, of course, some job centers do a good job, but there are major variations among the Danish job centers. And many of the caseworkers in job centers are not able to identify and target disabled job seekers, and even sometimes lack the confidence in their ability to find a job. And on the other hand, the other partner in such a good match, the workplaces, they prefer most often to recruit new employees without the assistance of the public employment service, and sometimes tend to discriminate job seekers with disabilities. So in the Danish case, we conclude that this makes it quite challenging to implement the political target of the government to have more people with disabilities into employment. So finally, I'll just briefly mention some of the bridges that we also identified in this project in order to make the labor market more inclusive for people with disabilities. And I think there are no quick fixes. There's not one single thing which will kind of solve this complex problem. So I think it's very important that we understand the barriers and bridges in among people with disabilities, their workplaces, as well as the employment services. And I think many projects could work on building self-efficacy and self-confidence of people with disabilities, promote better education system targeted at the needs of people with disabilities, also legitimize disclosure so that people with disabilities can announce their disabilities when they're applying for jobs. In Denmark, we have projects currently about showing a kind of certificate when you apply for jobs, and also announcing to employers the kind of compensation and support measures that you are eligible to as a person with disability. And I think that can actually reduce some of these information gaps and build better and stronger networks for workplaces, provide information, improve accessibility, and innovate job functions in cooperation with the workplaces, and challenge their ideas about what type of jobs that people with disabilities can work in. Coordination and co-creation between employment services and workplaces is also very important and inadequate at the moment. And then there needs to be some kind of identification of disability in employment services in order to make sure that the needs and requirements of people with disabilities are catered for in employment services. And these support and compensation schemes measures are used, and they also need to be more expert knowledge on disability in employment services. So I think these are some of our main findings, and as some of these, we call it low-hanging fruits, which can be improved for more people to be part of the labor market.
You so much, Thomas. That was really interesting. I want to actually ask you because I mean we tend to focus often on the barriers, but so I was really happy when you actually ended up here with the bridges. And I wanted to ask you if you would look a bit forward, let's say for the next 5 to 10 years, what would you say are the greatest possibilities when it comes to the Nordic countries for more inclusion? I mean, of course, it's not a quick fix, but do you think it's going to be like we will just have a lot of barriers now after the pandemic? So do you see any possibilities ahead?
Yeah, basically, I'm hopeful and optimistic, but I think I've been a labor market researcher for many years, and I've studied disability for the last number of years, and it is, of course, a bit depressing when you look at the statistics, and I think also our findings from Denmark are a bit depressing, but I'm optimistic, and I think. We need to address specifically these information barriers, this lack of information. I think in the Danish case, we do have some good legislation and economic support schemes, but we need a greater awareness and acknowledgement of the barriers that people with disabilities experience when they want to integrate on the labor market. And I think it is possible to improve the employment rates of people with disabilities.
So more awareness campaigns, that's an important factor for the next years in the Nordics. We actually have questions for you. We've had a lot of questions coming in from different viewers. And I would like to hand over now to Jessica, because I know she wants to ask you some questions. So to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Hanna. Thank you. Thomas, we have 2 questions for you. The first one is, do you count neuropsychiatric disorders like ADHD into the category mental disorders?
No, I don't. Yeah, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. I wouldn't do that. As I mentioned, our project was specifically on people with mobility impairments.
All right, and then there is a question from Sweden. In Sweden, a lot of people with disabilities decide to start their own companies to get a job. Do you see a similar pattern in Denmark?
I'm not sure. Again, the statistics are quite inadequate. I think in the Danish case, we have some good experiences with social enterprises, and people with disabilities also work in these or social economic enterprises. And I think that is a promising way forward to improve the employment rates of people with disabilities.
Thank you. And I would like to thank all the comments and questions so far. Please keep them coming. Back to you, Hanna.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And now it's actually time for a very short and brief break. So for now, we go and get some more water perhaps, or if you would like to have some coffee. And we'll be back 10:05. So it's a break for about 7-8 minutes. 10:05, we are back here at the studio. Thank you. So welcome back to this webinar where we're focusing on how to make the labor market more inclusive for people with disabilities and technology. And I hope you all had the chance to get something perhaps to drink. And now I would like to introduce the next speaker of this morning webinar. And it is Maria Maya. Maria has a background in health sciences and she holds a PhD on technology assessment. Maria works at the Institute for Technology Assessment and System Analysis at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where she in the last years has been working on projects focusing on assistive technology for people with disabilities. And she will now tell us a bit more about the needs and perceptions of assistive technology for people with disabilities, and she's focusing on deafness and hearing impaired, blind and visually impaired, and autism. So thank you, and I hand over to you, Maria.
Hi, good morning to everyone. Hi, it's a pleasure, and I would like to thank you for the kind invitation to be here today and to be able to share some of our project results. I will now share my screen, and hopefully everything works. Okay, so I'm guessing you are already able to see my slides. And yeah, so my study, as already mentioned by Hanna, it's on assistive technologies, but from a user's perspective. And so in my presentation, and just to have a short guidance on it, I will make a short introduction, then I will provide you some empirical sites on the needs and perceptions by people with disability. Then I would like to share with you some societal challenges that I hope will be interesting for further reflection on our current situation and on the desire for the future. And then I will make some brief conclusions. So just as a framing, this project was a request from the European Parliament, and it had much interest in the results. We were invited to be at the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, making a presentation and interacting with the parliamentarians at the European Parliament, and we attended so many other different conferences presenting the results of this study. We have published 3 main reports with different aspects, with different contents. All the links and information you can find, I think it will be available also in the chat, but also in my presentation, which I'm happily to share with you. And you will also be able to find the links or where you can find further and more detailed information, because today I'm not able to present everything to you, unfortunately. So I will start with some insights from the project. And one of the questions, we did an online questionnaire, European level, and we asked about the barriers that people face in society. And it's interesting to see that they're still the same. So communication and information barriers, and followed by social barriers and by political barriers. And in regard with this regulation issue, it's connected with the implementation of the UN Convention, also at the time with the European Accessibility Act, which was still much debated. It had to do also with the regulation from medical devices perspective, since many of the assistive technologies being used were labeled as, or are labeled as, medical devices, and therefore strongly connected with regulation in this sense. Also, one aspect, as Hanna mentioned, the study and a remark was per request of the European Parliament, focused only on blindness and visual impairment, deaf and hearing impairment, and ASD. So this was the request. And so again, coming back, regulation was an issue because there was still a blur or lacking legislation, because it was also considered to be a kind of a new field where assistive technologies were being developed when compared with blindness or deafness. And also in the connection with assistive technologies and services. We asked also about why, because in the questionnaire we realized that some people were using assistive technologies, others were not, and we asked why. And the most important reasons pointed out were related to the design and to the development of the technologies, which did not follow an universal or a user-driven design, and therefore they were even abandoned or not accepted to be used. And also in relation to that, acceptance and awareness. This also connected strongly with information, and information on how to use and what is available in terms of assistive technologies, but also cultural facts related to stigma and with age, in the sense that becoming older, people have showed to have more difficulties in learning and adapt to new to use new technologies. We also asked in the course of the project, we also asked about participants in which fields they were, they saw the importance of using technology to assist them in their tasks. And there was, in general, for the 3 disabilities, a really good, positive reply. So the assistive technologies, they do play an important role. And when specifically asked, as you can see here from these yellow boxes in connection with schools and work, it was shown that so this field reinforces the importance of assistive technologies in supporting people in developing their tasks. And one aspect that was mentioned also, because in addition to this online questionnaire, we also had several interviews with several experts from different fields. And one thing that was really a core issue was the UN Convention, and in regards with reasonable accommodation and the importance of it as an entrance point for assistive technologies in this field. And as you see here from this direct quote, there are a lot of rather simple and easy accommodations that can be made to include people at the workplace. And for instance, with autism and assistive technologies, it is important not only to consider the technologies per se, but also to consider some social measures, such as mentoring for systems or job coaches, but also related with the construction of the office or the room where people will be working, to regards to light or sounds, or if it's a quiet place not near the printing where everyone is passing, because as you know, people with ASDs, they tend to work better if they are in a more relaxed and calm environment. So in a nutshell, what we saw in the project and main results is that, as already mentioned here by the other 2 speakers, there is still discrimination at the recruitment phase, and it's related mainly with attitudinal barriers. And also there is still lack of knowledge from company side in relation to what kind of assistive technologies are available and what kind of incentives or benefits are related with hiring someone with a disability or an impairment. But not only this lack of knowledge is from the company side, but also from people with disability. As we saw, there is a lack of information about the kind of technologies that are available, and also how to use them or how to maintain them in the long run. In addition, also mentioned was the failure in education system. A good education system is regarded as being a good precondition for the inclusion of people with disabilities in the labor market. As we can see from this quote, which I would like to share. It was made by our first speaker, by Stefan Trommel. If people with disabilities have not been able to take part in education in some way as the non-disabled children because of the lack of adjustments, including technologies, then the end result is that the person with the lower level of education and skills will have more difficulties to find a job, not just because of a disability, but mainly because of the lower level of education and training. I would like now to call your attention for a reflection into the future. And doing this in the course of the project, we came up with the 4 explorative scenarios regarding the situation of people with disabilities and the role of assistive technologies, looking at the future, such as 2030. And these scenarios were developed containing relevant information that emerged also from our study. And it was the content of these scenarios. They were developed in an envisioning meeting that took place at European Parliament with not only the research team, but also several external experts that were invited to participate, but also some parliamentarians. They were also there. And discussing how these scenarios could be put it into the paper, so to say. And so in order to guide us in these scenarios, we, as you can see it from this axis, the openness of society towards the other. For example, people who do not conform what is considered to be the norm, as well as the extent of technological progress and its social embedding. These are our keys, so to say, to design the scenarios in this axis. And in more detail, as you can see here from these 2 yellow circles, I will go a little bit into detail about what could happen if these 2 scenarios were actually reality. And so, as you can see, we have a mid-tech solution in a society in one of the scenarios, and then we have another potential scenario is an intensive high-tech reliance in an individualistic society. So what are the main characteristics of these 2 scenarios? I will start with the first one. In the first one, we will live in a society that it's inclusive. There is a good level of participation of citizens with impairments and disabilities in all aspects of life. And due to the ongoing high prevalence or a high increasing of aging, we will have a prevalence of disability as well. Ability and disability, they are considered along a spectrum, and there is a widespread use of low and mid-tech solutions. On the other hand, if we go for the other scenario, what we will have is a more individualistic society, a self-sufficient through technology society, where self-enhancement is common and people with disabilities are at the forefront of the technology advances. There is no stigma related to the use of assistive technologies, and there is inclusion. However, it is related with the use of technology. So as long as technology is used, inclusion is there. On the other hand, we have a high-tech environment. So what are then the opportunities and the challenges that we need to reflect on these 2 scenarios? On the one hand, on the mid-tech scenario, we have an increased market for assistive technologies. Maybe in public spaces, some measures considering different disabilities will collide. Inclusion overcomes fear and rejection, and the economic costs of having this full inclusive society are unknown. On the intensive high-tech scenario, we will have an increased high-tech assistive technologies market due to demand. We have a social embedding of technology neglected. So, and we have an increased risk of cybercrime due to the reliance on a networked society. These scenarios are just speculative, just to make it clear, but they are, and they do not pretend, they do not want to predict the future, but still they are a good exercise, and this is my invitation for your reflection. They are just an opportunity to explore opportunities and challenges, and to stimulate a reflection and a debate, to communicate important issues around the role of assistive technologies and in the fields of disabilities, and to contribute for shaping a desired future by reflecting what we really want in a near future. And so my conclusions, and I will be brief. I would like to start with of course, again, the importance of putting the UN Convention into practice and to assure that it's really being translated in each country in their own regulation, but also to supervise and to assess if it's really put it into practice and reinforce, maybe via penalties, if there is a non-compliance. On the other hand, technological options need to be connected to social sphere. And here it's really important that, for instance, for the considering universal design of assistive technologies, social technical aspects should be embedded in when developing technologies. In terms of education, again, I think it's really important to train people with disabilities also in how to better use some technologies, but also train professionals and providing this information and advising which technologies work best or which is available on the market. And here there was also a gap identified. And so this training or this education should be increased. And also the emergence of new professionals. So I think that already was mentioned here. New professions connected with the development of digitalization and artificial intelligence will be created, and so it's also important to see how this education can be supported. In terms of employment, of course, then we need to pay a special attention to create a disability-friendly labor market that needs more support. There are lack of information. It was also identified. So, and as I mentioned, this information needs to be better disseminated, and awareness, as also mentioned by the previous speaker. We have still high attitudinal barriers, and in our society, and it was really interesting to see that in the end, I think, and to be honest, I think when we did the study, it was meant for us to come up with what kind of technologies people are expecting in the future to have a bigger role. And what our project showed is that people with disabilities, they are not so much keen into having such high-tech technologies, but rather to focus on society and on awareness. And in the end, this was the key message of our project, that we have to start changing mentalities in society and raising awareness of the importance of inclusion in society, from not only regarding people with disabilities, but also other kinds of to broaden up our inclusive society. And this is really high importance, and should be, in our point of view, the first stage to also to be reflected in the employment sector.
Maria, thank you so much. And thank you also for sharing these important conclusions. I mean, as a human rights lawyer, I'm of course very happy when you say that you have to take, legislation to practical implementation, because what we need to see is practical implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And so I would like to ask you that, actually. Could you give me one of your favorite examples where assistive technology has really made a difference in work life, like a practical, concrete example? Do you have something like that?
Yeah, well, I can give you my impressions, or I can give you an input that it was really interesting for me as to reflect. It was also an example given by one expert who was also who had autism. And what he mentioned is again the use of virtual reality, for instance, or augmented reality in training for a new position. So somebody with autism, it will be useful, and it's already being used, for instance, to have this augmented reality in combination with virtual reality, where they have this glasses, virtual glasses, and they can, before going into real life experience, they can, like a game, so to say, they can practice social interactions, they can practice some tasks, and was for me really interesting to see, because virtual reality, it's thought in so many fields that with this concrete example, it was really interesting to me.
Thank you. That was really an excellent example. Very
and also in relation with artificial intelligence. So this is also interesting to see.
Very interesting. I actually know there is some questions also. There is, as we said, please continue writing your different questions in the chat. You can address them specifically to the speakers, or you can write it in public. But we do have some questions coming in for you. So I'm going to just briefly ask Jessica from Helsinki to join us. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, we actually have a couple of questions to Maria. The first one, what are the most important areas where we need more research about assistive technology and employment?
Well, as already mentioned, and this was also what we found, we also made a study at the European level, focusing only because we had limited resources and limited, really short time to present this project. And we focused on 4 countries, but Portugal, Hungary, Sweden, and Germany. And what we saw on this, but I think it can be, also this is replicable for many of the other countries, is the lack of data. And I think that really more studies need to be done, need to be conducted at national levels, focusing on these aspects in relation to people with disability, in relation not only to work, but also in relation to some normal life aspects and education and so on. And I think it will be also important not only to have these focused projects or kind of research, but also to push this data to come out of the national census. For instance, in Portugal, in the census that is conducted every 10 years to the population, there are really few questions related to disabilities, and this is really important. And I think it's important also to be conducted in other European, and not only European, of course, but in other countries in general.
Jessica, I think we only have time for one more brief question.
Yes. Do you know if someone has explored assistive technologies from the viewpoint of data protection law, i.e. cloud-based automated captioning?
No, to be honest, I'm not. I'm not aware. We did not focus that aspect on the project, but it's a really important issue, and I think a good idea for further research.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts. Now I would like to introduce Jan Gulliksen and Stefan Johansson to have, they have made together a compilation on the current existing research about digital and technical solutions to increase inclusion in working life. And Jan is a professor in human-computer interaction at KTH Royal Institute of Technology. Hi, Jan. I see you here next to me now. And he's also the vice president for digitalization at KTH. And he has been the chairman of the Swedish Committee of Digitalization, belonging to the Ministry of Enterprise. And today, Jan is a member of the Digitalization Council. And together with you, you have Stefan, I know as well. Hi, Stefan. Hi. And Stefan has a PhD in human-computer interaction at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, and he is the CEO of Begripsam. His research focuses on participation in a digital society. So I'm going to hand over now to you, to Jan and Stefan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity of talking about our project here at this wonderful conference. I'm also very happy actually that it's being digital, because it means apparently that we get much more participants than we would have gotten if it would have been a physical conference. So, and thanks also for the excellent introduction. And finally, thank you to the Nordic Welfare Center for giving us the opportunity of talking about this project and getting also the opportunity to do some research on what actually research do exist within the field of digital technologies to help people to get an employment or to keep and maintain an employment with disabilities. As a member of the Digitalization Council, I also see that this is of great interest to the Swedish government to know these things, because they truly live and share the view that including as many people as possible in the labor market is of utmost importance to do. So they are following this with a great interest in that respect. I'm also grateful to Gripsam for doing this collaboration together on this, and I'm actually gonna hand over to Stefan Johansson to present the major results of our studies. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, and I'm trying to share a presentation. Is that broadcasted now? Okay, so this is a study on what is known, what is the sort of contemporary knowledge about this area, and as Jan told you, we have sort of looked for is there any research or any other sort of evidence that technology actually help people to get a job or keep a job. So we have been looking on research or on ongoing innovation projects or other projects, and sort of the trends in technology, and try to do an analysis of the situation and possibly propose some potential ways forward. And the conclusion is that there is a lot of technology. There is actually a lot of technology developed, and a lot of developed technology is targeting different kind of impairments. So we can see that researchers and people with impairments are sort of engaged in developing technology that potentially could provide some improvements in life. But we can't find that many examples of that kind of technology being implemented specifically in the workplace. So there is something missing between the technology that is developed and the implementation of this technology in a workplace setting. So we often you can find more examples of things going on in healthcare or domestic settings. So there is technology, but there is not that many new technology introduced in the workplace setting. So the technology people are using as assistive technology in workplace is often actually quite old. They are still working, so there's nothing wrong with that, but there isn't that much of new technology introduced. But we have some good examples where this actually have happened. So we can report on some technology finding its way into the workplace settings, but there is clearly a potential of bringing more new interesting solutions into the workplace. And the evidence of what is working is rather to be found by professionals and practitioners, and rather than research, because there is not that much research on sort of looking for evidence that technology actually works. But people on the field say technology works, and I think we have to believe them. But when we find research on disability and workplace, you can often see in that research that there has been some technology used, but the technology is often a background noise in that kind of research, because the primary research questions is often about organization or support system or training or something like that. So you can see technology is mentioned in the reports, but not in that detail, so that you can't really see what technology was used in a specific research project, or how that technology actually provided for a positive outcome, because there could have been other things that also provided the positive outcome. So it's hard to really distinguish what role does technology play in other research projects. We can clearly see that people have used some technology, and sometimes you can see in the report the reporting is it worked well, but then you can't get any more details on how actually what did they do and what kind of technology was used in this specific project. And as earlier speakers have said, we can't find that much statistics on exactly what kind of technology is used in what kind of settings and who uses the technology and so on. So also in this area, there is a lack of the statistics. We don't have enough data. And it's clear to see that also that assistive technology as such is changing. It's not only standalone solutions anymore. So if that was the case earlier, that you can sort of buy a specific product and implement it in the workplace setting, nowadays it could also be something embedded directly in the operating systems of the devices that every person on the workplace uses. Or it could be embedded functions in mainstream products. So we can see a lot of earlier assistive technology finding its way into be sort of functions in mainstream products, and that's good, but it's also can sort of prevent people from using that kind of technology. And also assistive technology is being more and more being mainstream products. So they are sort of they could be bought anywhere by anyone, and then they are not sort of defined as assistive technology anymore. And that also changes the way people provide assistive technology, because if they can't get paid for providing a product, they can't either give support and information about how to use the product. So we can see that when technology is possible to use by everywhere, anytime, that is hard to combine with the more silo-based systems of assistive technology. So there is perhaps a need of a modernization of the systems on how to provide people with assistive technology. We have identified a lot of technological areas where there is interesting stuff going on. So people are trying to use different kind of technologies to provide some kind of support for people with different kind of impairments. And as earlier mentioned, we have a promising area of artificial intelligence, AI. You can imagine that there will be a lot of AI embedded in assistive technology in the future. You can't find that many examples today, but there are some that are implemented already today. You can clearly see that people are starting to use different kind of applications in smart devices. So they find a supportive or assistive technology and they download it directly in their smart devices and they start to use them. Sometimes perhaps the only person know that they have an assistive technology in their devices is the person himself or herself, and the other sort of colleagues doesn't perhaps know that I'm using that kind of technology. We can see that cloud-based solutions is an interesting area, but as mentioned earlier, there could be some data protection issues when you are using cloud-based solutions, but there is a potential in that technology to provide support or help. As we also have heard earlier, collaboration technology has been in focus now during the COVID-19 situation. We need to collaborate by using digital tools, and there also have been some fast improvements on accessibility on those kind of environments, and those relate to communication technology that has been around for a longer period of time, but they're sort of intertwined, and many of these technologies are in fact intertwined with each others. You can also see a lot of technology related to control the environment around you, so different kind of devices that could be used to create control of other devices or the surrounding environment. There is a lot of research going on robotics and exoskeletons and that kind of technology providing for example, increased mobility. We can see some potential gains in using augmented or extended realities or virtual realities that clearly has a promising area, but we can't find that many sort of applications in the workplace today. So perhaps that is an area that will grow in the future. You can also see haptic interfaces, the sort of interfaces in the air where you can sort of interact with the technology with your hands or something like that. Hearing technology has improved a lot in the later years, and also language and speech technology is sort of improving fast. As mentioned, recruitment technology is both sort of a potential new barrier and a new risk, and you can see some development where companies clearly target. They claim that they are more inclusive when using different kind of AI software in recruitment technology. And you can also see an area called wearables where you have sensors and you have sort of technology on your clothes or you're carrying sort of technology around in textiles and other fabrics. So there is a lot of technological areas that potentially could be used, and there is a lot of sort of research going on in these areas, but the implementation in the workplace setting is still lacking. So just to say something of the potential ways forward here, there was more of a cooperation in earlier. So something happened sort of 15, 20 years ago, and the Nordic countries sort of closed a lot of specialized institutions to work with assistive technology and moved to a more sort of market-oriented model. And we think that we have to sort of rebuild and re-establish possibilities to cooperate. And perhaps the market can't sort of drive this development on its own, so it needs to be a cooperation between sort of public sector and markets. And there seems to have been better opportunities to do that for 15, 20 years ago. And we think we have to sort of move back to a kind of more collaborative system. And that correlates with the lack of, because what was on the agenda then was sort of more stable funding systems to take a product or an idea to the market. You had, at least in some Nordic countries, you had sort of funding systems around that could help people to take a product and introduce it to the market. And nowadays we can't really find that kind of system. So we have a lot of research, but the research is sort of, they fix the problem, but they don't take the product to the market. That has to be other people doing that. And then we need to sort of look at other areas and potentially bring solutions that is working on other areas to the workplace setting and introduce them in the workplace setting. And that could be done by publish best practice, share knowledge. There is a lack of knowledge in this area. So if someone has sort of invented something that seems to work, we should spread that information around so that others could start to implement the solution in their work settings. And maybe we need to look at the rules and regulations and the systems and apply a more wider definition of what actually is assistive technology. And the model for providing for assistive technology needs to sort of realize that, well, the products could be cheaper or they could even be free. You can download them for free. But the need for information and training and support is still around. It hasn't sort of gone away. When technology becomes cheaper, the cost for providing people with information and training or support will actually maybe rise. And that isn't really included in the sort of business model for the providers of this technology. They find it hard to give people the sort of amount of support and training that often is needed to use the technology in an efficient way. So that sort of calls for looking at the model, the business model of providing this kind of technology. And then there is clearly a need for more research. We need broader research programs. Many research projects in this area is very small and limited. So there is, maybe we need to combine a lot of smaller projects into broader programs, and programs working on longer terms to really sort of get the data and know what's working or not working. And that has to be done in multiple disciplines working together. We also probably need to have more focus on the implementation part here. There is a lot of technology, as I said, but how to implement it in the workplace setting. And we need to have sort of an open mind here and allow for experiments and create better statistics on actually what is going on. So that is the main taking from our work.
I would like to ask you something. What has surprised you most? I mean, with you doing now this compilation of research and of knowledge, what has surprised you most in your findings?
Well, maybe the lack of statistics, and that we don't have actually data on what is working and what is not working. Maybe that's the most surprising thing.
And so what do you hope will come out of this compilation? What do you think? I mean, if the lack of data, I mean, that's a problem. So what can be the result of that? That we actually need more data? Or what do you think is needed?
I think that if I could add to Stefan's list of requirements for future research, it's basically there's a need for more research, more funding in this area, because it's so dispersed, the things that are happening, and so scattered. So the actual cases of research that we can find is usually a lot of the time case studies and so forth, where we do not really get the opportunity to build knowledge that can be put into other situations in that sense. So I would urge everybody that is close to any funding agencies and so forth to see that this is a field where it requires much more projects to be launched to address this, because it is an important area for the society where we can gain a lot by investing more in research and actually contributing to less costs in the other end when a lot of people with disabilities need to go on welfare when they actually could be able to work.
Well, one thing that is sure, just like we said before, that need to go from legislation to implementation. In the same way, you need to go like connecting different parts, I think, of society when working on these issues. We do need more research, but we do also need more implementation of the research, and therefore different actors have to work together. For example, me following a lot of your very important research, both you and the speakers before, I think it's really important, but it's not always that easy to understand all these staple and graphs that you're showing. So I think one important thing, I think at Begripsam, I think you're working with this also, but like it's important to explain the research, to explain what you're showing, so we all can also make something out of that in we as practitioners in different parts. And I want to ask you one more question. What measures do you think are most important to increase the pace of assistive technology? Do you have any advice on that? What do you think would be most important if we want to increase the pace?
Well, I would say to start use the stuff in the workplace and see what works and not. So sort of very, very pragmatic and practical approach. That I think is a sort of a missing link here. Because
we already have a lot of technology, right? I mean, we have all these apps and things. We have smartphones, we have tablets, but are we really using them? Yeah, that's a very important part of it. I would like to now listen to Jessica from Helsinki. Is there any questions, perhaps?
Yes, there is a nice activity in the chat. I could start with a question like this. A huge problem when you are visually impaired is to get from one place to another, which a lot of jobs demand. A solution could be self-driving cars. What do you think about that for people that are blind or visually impaired?
I think self-driving cars is, of course, an excellent opportunity to because with the traditional cars we had, you couldn't drive even if you had the slightest vision problems in that sense. But with self-driving cars, there opens up an opportunity for a whole new arena of users, not only people with vision problems, but you could actually, as a small child, drive a car as well with that type of opportunity. So I think that we should cherish and acknowledge the new technology that comes, that provides so many interesting opportunities to be a part of the society. So that's an excellent idea.
And then a comment about the research. There is, we need support for research close to the practice. And also a question about research. Are there more research about assistive technology for some disability groups than others? And how can the differences be explained if that is the case?
Yeah, I think that you will find that there is a lot of research on the area of vision and hearing and mobility. I would say that those are probably the most researched areas, and then we have the cognitive area that is not that much research, but if it is, you can often find research on people with intellectual disability. That's an area within the cognitive area, and of course you can find others example, but I think if I would dare to do a ranking order, I think that would be the ranking.
If I could add to that, I think there's an important other distinction to do in this aspect as well, and that is that now we've focused on digital tools and assistive technologies and how they can help. But most often we find that the problems is not actually the technology. The problems are relating to organization, to attitudes and values and those type of aspects. So therefore, I think that truly multidisciplinary research where you sort of mix human sciences with technological sciences and also make it in a practitioner-oriented way. I mean, Stefan and I have both been working with action research where we actually try to improve the practice as a good way forward.
So thank you so much. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you can see a sort of a trend that it's easier to get sort of the hand of assistive technology if you already have a job and something happens at the job. Then you can actually be provided with a lot of sort of advanced technology to rehabilitate to the job. It's more difficult to be in the position of not having a job and sort of get hold of the technology that potentially could help you to be in a better position for the job.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you so much, Jan. And thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing the questions. And now we're actually going to have another small break. And we're going to be back here at 11. At 11. So 11 sharp, we will start here again. So please take a small break, perhaps something to drink, and we'll be back together at 11 again for the continuance of this webinar. Welcome back to this webinar focusing on a more inclusive labor market for people with disabilities and how assistive technology and digitalization and artificial intelligence can be a part of that journey. And now I would like to introduce Gunnar Mikkelsen. Gunnar is a senior advisor at the Nordic Assistive Technologies Center. Hi, there you are. Nice to see you. He works at the intersection of research and counseling, testing methods to introduce new technology for people with disabilities. And Gunnar will now tell us a bit more about how we can implement digital and technical solutions in working life. So I hand over to you, Gunnar.
Oh, thank you very much for a kind introduction, Hanna. And thank you, NVC, for inviting me to present at this event. Yes, I will try to present the framework to a method for implementing assistive technology in the workplace. Implementing technology aids in the workplace can be a complicated and often unclear process. So one approach and to manage this complex process is to divide the task into some smaller pieces. And let's see if I can get this working. So, as you see, there's a method divided into 4 phases. And the headlines for the phases are mapping of technology skills and challenges, introduction of technology, rearranging the socio-technical arrangement, and a long time follow-up. This method for implementation of assistive technology in the workplace is based on analytical concepts and research from studies of science, technology, and society, for short SDS. And theoretically, this method also is based on models to describe accommodation with assistive technology, such as HAT and the GAP model. And the method also builds on experienced best practice described by researchers like Tony Gentry and Ingen Moser's development of how to implement welfare technology. And the approach is more based on social work science than on medical health tradition or engineering technical approach. And the background for the method is development and research within the context of inclusion of and facilitation for people with cognitive disability in labor market. And this is a group of young, resourceful people who have been struggling to get into ordinary labor market. They are often challenged of being in the workplace, master the social dimensions of the workplace, and often minor problems with the tasks themselves. Okay, some statistics. People with cognitive disabilities are underrepresented in the employment statistics. The employment rate for people with cognitive disabilities is between 4 and 15%, and employment rate for people with disabilities for all sorts is 43%, and to compare, about 70% of the population as a whole is employed. And adults with cognitive challenges associated with ADHD or Asperger's syndrome can experience functional impairment with regard to concentration, self-organization, executive function. And as a whole, they are more vulnerable to stress, cognitive fatigue, procrastination, so forth. And they're also a younger group of adults who are struggling to get work. As a group, they are on average 10.5 years younger when they apply for vocational rehabilitation compared to all that seek help to enter the workforce. And they're also a growing group. And different surveys shows that there's an increase between 121 and 792%. And it's also more expensive to carry out vocational rehabilitation programs for this group. And there are also some educational challenges. The good thing with this group is that introducing STC, we can go back to that, can help to improve competitiveness of job seekers with cognitive disabilities. STC, we're talking here about cognitive support technologies. and that refers to all IT solution that the individual use to maintain or improve his or her competitiveness, or that help to participate, the user to become more motivated to try to cope with an activity or a life situation. Typical example of STC are smartphones, social skills, and communications apps. But to implement assistive technology, you need a strategy, method. There's no automatic process between the fact that we have new technology and getting the user actually to use the technology to get or keep a job. The situation now is that compensatory technology is used to small extent in the workforce and workplace accommodation. And common to support technologies are an underused tool in vocational rehabilitation. And one of the explanations for this underuse is the lack of simple methods for implementation. So, back to the method. Here's the overview of the different phases of the method. As you can see, it's reflected. It's based on social science and STF studies. In the method, we use terms as relations, changing of habits, and changing of roles. And this method is designed specifically for people using STC, but can be transferred and adapted to other settings where a user with personal technology aids will work and do a job in a work collective with colleagues, technologies, partners, customers, suppliers, and so on. The method is divided into 4 phases: mapping of technology, introducing of technology, rearranging the socio-technical arrangement, and long-time follow-up. I will now present each of the 4 phases. The first phase, in this phase, we try mapping the user's technology skills and challenges. It's a quite traditional place to start. In Norway, we have a survey called H13, a mapping of cognitive disabilities. There's an interview and a reviewing of medical records. We also have, in this first phase, we have to explore which situations and conditions in the working life that the user might find challenging. We can use a tool called Asperger's Syndrome Workplace Interview. The aim is to describe the challenges so we can find out the ways of dealing with them when you come to take them into account in the job context. At least, last thing to do in this phase is to describe the relations between the user and the technology. Ask some questions, find out what kind of relationship does the user have to technology in general. The best practice studies in the field of cognition, the people with cognitive disabilities, is example with these 8 questions. And 3 of them are: what do you mostly use your phone for? Can you successfully navigate the mobile device interface? And important question, will you choose to use your mobile device as a vocational support in the workplace? And this question, of course, are just stepping stones to further talking about the user's relationships and motivation to use technology. So after this phase, we know a little about where the user stands, and we can start developing, accommodation, and modifying. So the second phase. The second phase is all about introducing the technology so the user develops a personal relationship with the technology. In this phase, the aim is to make the user an expert user and confident in the interaction with the technology. During this phase, the user should be establish such a good coping competence that the user strengthen their competitiveness in the labor market. And this is an empowering process and a social alteration work. During this phase, the user should learn to tackle more situations than previous. And this introduction phase of technology can be a step forward and a step on the path to a good life. And the individual can engage in the process of fulfilling his or her potential. And the introduction of new technology always entails new ways to do tasks, and that can be challenging. Our job as professionals in this phase is the same as in social work in general, and more specific here, motivate to help the user learn to use the technology and change behavioral patterns. And when it comes to cognitive challenges, it's not about finding as many apps as possible. Best practice says maximum 6 apps and a lot of motivational and fun apps. A lot of training in using the apps are beneficial, of course, and a lot of repetition is required until automatically set up skills. And the learning of doing things in new ways of using technology can be done in one-on-one settings or homogeneous group. And like all other social alteration work, this will take weeks and months to truly form new habits. I hope you can put up a link in the chat to a blog from Jamie and Lyon to learn more about a more symbiotic relationship between the user and technology. The third phase is all about involving the network and setting up this new social technical arrangement. In this phase, we are completely dependent of experts in inclusion at the workplace and accommodation with technology. And social technical arrangement indicates that it's impossible to separate the human and the technological aspects in the workplace. Those two entities are interconnected. I can think about one job where human don't use or are depending on technology. And that's a good perspective to have when we're in the business of accommodate with new technology. And the purpose of this phase is to offer a structure or methodology method to set social and value consequences in the center of the introduction of assistive technology. First, in this phase, we have to identify all involved actors, both people and technology. And here's adventures one more time, that you have professionals that know something about technical standards and psychosocial working environment. When we accommodate with technology, we change social technical arrangement at the workplace. And in this process, we need to find out how this is affected and change the tasks, responsibilities, and roles. Example for colleagues and managers. And we have to ask some analytical question in this phase. For example, in the idea that the worker should become more autonomous in his performance, with the use of new technology, of course. Should perhaps colleagues stop helping the user with some tasks? Perhaps the employee should, using new technology, should be given more challenging tasks as response. And we have to talk about values. For whom does it have value that we contribute with workplace accommodation for the technology, with technology? And after this rather analytic but necessary task in the phase, we can begin to change the social technical arrangement, both by accommodating new technology and also with negotiating new roles, tasks, ways of doing things, and responsibilities among co-workers and managers. And the fourth and last phase, a worker is expected to be in the workforce for some 40 years. We need to adjust of the technology. It's obvious. We have to adjust in the phase. So in the long phase, we have to transform the follow-up routine from real life to a digital follow-up. And we have to keep hold of the user so she not disappear out of working life without us discovering the need for adjustment in the accommodation. At least, but not least, last but not least, we need to assure that we have that the user have access to 24/7 support, both for assistive technology and mainstream technology. To summarize fast, we talked about the phases: mapping of technology, skills and challenges, introduction of technology, learning new ways of doing tasks, rearranging the socio-technical arrangement, and prepare for a long-time digital follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gunnar. I want to ask you about something because within all kind of human rights work, one of the key issues we often speak about is the importance of knowing your rights to be able to claim them. So a lot of focus within human rights education and within human rights work is, of course, empowerment. And you were speaking about different phases, and you also spoke about empowerment as a part of your second phase. So I'm, of course, very interested about that. Could you develop this a little bit about empowerment in the second phase?
Yes, thank you for the question, Hanna. Yes, in my own research, I found that in addition to be able to use the technology to solve specific tasks, the process of being introduced to technology is empowering. So the very process of being introduced to technologies and learning new things are reported to be empowering. So the user reported to be a little more confident after learning to do new tasks with new technology, even if they didn't use the technology as often. So gaining some power over your situation, not only through laws and conventional regulation, but also by mastering life with assistive technology is, in one sense, empowering. And I think you need to be a little confident in yourself to go out in the working place with an assisted device in front of you.
I want to ask you about that as well, because there are plenty of apps. I mean, we heard before when, for example, Jan and Stefan was speaking, they said that one of the actual problems is that we're not using all the technology that is already there. So what do you think? What is needed for all this innovation that already exists to come into use in the labor market and in our workplaces?
I think that professional training and follow-up over time is what's needed to really benefit the user. And not only basic training, they must develop such good competence skills that they can solve a problem in different ways with a new app and be more creative with the technology. A little more MacGyver something.
A bit more MacGyver. Okay, that I like. That sounded pedagogical. I want to ask Jessica, are there any questions coming in from the people listening? Let's see.
Yes, certainly is. We can start with one. Are there any differences between implementing traditional assistive technology and new mainstream technology as assistive technology?
No, I don't think so. I think the method should be the same, if it's mainstream or conventional assistive technology or some other what we call technology. I think it's very necessary to do a thorough implementation process.
And then we have a participant who works at Uppsala University who says there is even difficulties to find out what kind of support you can get for different impairment for employees. Can this first step be legislated to improve the situation?
That's a good input. Yes, that's that's not my field for legislation, but it's necessary. We need to have a good support system when we make users depending on technology and expect them to manage their lives with technology throughout the day.
If this is somebody's field, please write in the chat. Back to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much also, Gunnar, for your presentation. And now, it has been a very interesting morning. We've been hearing a lot of different experts and researchers, and we've been given a lot of new insights based on the latest research. And we will now end today's session with some speakers that are practitioners, and they work in everyday life with the implementation of different technologies. And so I would really warmly like to welcome Fredrik Ruben, Lars Löv, and Sif Holst. So I hope you're with us here today. And I will tell you a little bit more about our speakers. Fredrik, he is the CEO of Tobii Dynavox. And Tobii is the global leader in assistive technology for communication. Their products and solutions are developed for alternative communication use and within special education. This includes devices controlled by eye movements or touch screens used by people with disabilities to communicate, to control their environment and become independent. So very, very warmly welcome to you, Fredrik. And then we Thank you. And then we also have Lars. And Lars Löv is the Deputy Director General of the Swedish Public Employment Agency. He has earlier served as Director General of the Swedish ESF Council and has a background, amongst other things, as the Chairman of the Swedish Disability Federation Corporation. And he is the former Disability Ombudsman of Sweden also. He has also been a CEO at the recruitment company Peritos. So warmly welcome to you also, Lars.
Thank you, Hanna. You forgot the most important part. I've been working together with you for a couple of years.
Yes. You were actually my boss once upon a time. So, and then I would also like to introduce Sif Holst. She's the Vice Chair of the Disabled People's Organization in Denmark. She's also the Vice Chair of the Knowledge Center about Disability, a member of the Nordic Council on Disability, and she's a candidate for the UN CRPD committee. So warmly welcome to you also. I would like to start actually by asking you all the three of you the same question. Could you just give us some brief reflections on what you found especially interesting today after listening to the input we got from all researchers? Because I mean, you are in different ways practitioners. So what did you find especially interesting this morning? Who would like to start?
I can start.
Yeah, please do, Fredrik.
This is Fredrik here. First of all, the affordability of technology, and I think the discussions about business models, etc., is of course for us being a commercial company in this space is really a jungle to try to understand. And there is probably no other company. Also, I mean, most of the companies that work in this space are quite mission-driven that would like to make stuff more affordable. But it's typically a function of volume. And when everything is done in small volumes, then affordability kind of is beaten by mainstream tech. I think, however, that mainstream tech is super important. And to Maria, I think you talk about the stigma of using assistive technology. If a iPhone or an iPad or something like that is the assistive technology, it will be much more normal. Last but not least, of course, the lack of research and understanding and knowledge also among the profession here is a huge hinder. So we need to fix that.
Thank you. And Sif, what did you find? What did you think about this morning? Oh, your sound. Yeah, I'm gonna see if we hear you also. No, the sound, we're not hearing you. So we'll go over just briefly to Lars and we'll see if our technicians here can help out with fixing the sound. So Lars, what did you think about this morning?
Oh, well, very interesting. And since I'm not on a daily basis focusing on the disability perspective, it's very interesting to recap a few things. But a few things that more specifically was said. Lars started the morning with saying that technologies can create both opportunities and new barriers, and I think that is an important perspective, basic perspective to bear in mind. But then I also think that what Thomas said early in the morning was that there are no quick fixes, and what the coming speakers showed is actually exactly that we need to have a very holistic and broad perspective on different ways forward to meet the challenges. And I also liked Thomas' optimism, of course. And I think that Stefan Trömmel, as a starter, gave an example of possible optimism, saying that in the structural changes that the labor markets throughout the world is going through right now, we can see new opportunities. We need to see new opportunities to address the challenges that we need.
So, I actually want to ask you something, Fredrik. Many traditional assistive technology companies, they have had their market changing dramatically as a result, for example, of American giants like Google and Microsoft, and they have increasingly have been including assistability solutions in their offering. And I know you have chosen to work with them. So can you develop, how have you chosen to do so? And what opportunities do you see? Because you spoke about the stigma also, like if you have it in your regular iPhone, if it's a part of Google. I mean, if it becomes a part of your everyday life, it's going to become much more implemented. So can you tell us more about this?
Sure. I think that the by far biggest challenge this industry has is the lack of awareness, and also among professionals, even the people who are supposed to know this, whether you're a speech language pathologist or an occupational therapist, you're unaware of the technology, how it works, how to embrace it, and maybe you're a little bit afraid of it. The fact that in 2010, Apple launched the iPad that made a huge thing for people who use a tablet or a touch interface to communicate. And hence, the communication devices market quadrupled or even more in volume, but of course at a lower price point. I think that was great. I think that's exactly what this industry needs. It's not kind of more niched products. The iPad, however, is not perfect. It's fragile. If you're an autistic child and you have behavioral issues, it's fragile. So figuring out how to make specific tools for that specific person, there is a market for that. Similarly, what we launched with Google just some time ago is about home automation. For people with physical impairments, the ability to be able to control your lights, turn off up the blinds, order pizza or whatever, has now been so much more democratized with the Amazon Alexas and the Apple HomeKits and the Google Homes, etc. I think bringing these markets together is actually opening up a lot and makes it affordable. It makes it normal, and all of a sudden we're helping so many more people. So why fight that river? That would be stupid.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying, because a lesson is that from many of the solutions being, developed for assistive technology, it's actually good for many others. So it actually becomes very relevant. And could you just tell us a little bit more? How do you see the future of assistive technology when in relation to consumer products?
Like you say, there are throughout the history so many applications of assistive technology that has become mainstream. My favorite examples is the one-hand water faucet, the water tap, where you don't need to use both hands to mix warm and cold water. That was an assistive technology appliance in the start. The TV remote is the same thing. If we then go more high tech, of course, what I talked about, the Google Assistant, etc., it's an assistive technology tool. Closed captioning and subtitles, also in live meetings, is great for everybody who sits at the subway watching Instagram or Facebook. But it's actually really good also for people who who are hard of hearing. And in our case, we have developed and been working for many years with, for example, eye tracking as an interaction method for people with physical impairments. But what we're seeing now is that comes into computer games, cars, and a lot of other environments. And that's just, again, a similar way how assistive technology becomes totally mainstream. So it happens all over the place.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you, Lars, now, because one of the conclusions, I mean, from KTH and Begripsen, but also, I mean, if we're listening to Fredrik, I mean, there's so many products already there today. There's so much innovation. There's so much new technology, but it's actually not being used. It's not being used, I mean, to its full potential today. So, I mean, of course, you're representing the Swedish Public Employment Service. You have a very important task in this. So what can you do to support this development and actually for the implementation and usement of these different tools that are already there?
First of all, I really want to emphasize what you and Fredrik discussed, on the importance of that, because having the approach of a more general approach to accessibility and participation is of course crucial. And our role as an agency, well, we look at our the people that we are in contact with on a daily basis from two perspectives. We are of course in contact with people that are seeking for job opportunities, but of course we also are in contact with employers. And from this perspective, it's very important for us to help employers to broaden their perspective on how to find, to recruit and find the competence that they need. And a more very specific Swedish perspective is that we have a responsibility as a sectorial responsibility based in regulation or legislation, and of course we need to address, to see how we can address this within that responsibility as well. But other things that we can do is, of course, take the suggestions in Stefan Johansson's and Jan's report. Of course, we can take part in discussing the suggestions that they put forward in their research and see what role we can play in that aspect as well.
Thank you so much, Lars. One thing I, of course, have to ask you now, when you're part of this conversation, is that, I mean, right now we see, I mean, as a result, of course, of the pandemic as well, unemployment rising very rapidly. And what can and what needs to be done to prevent that people with disabilities slip even further from the labor market? I mean, I know this is one of the big tasks you're also working with. So what can be done and what is done, actually?
Well, we have to face fact that the increased competition on the labor market will not be positive for persons that have been struggling to be a part of the labor market in a better economic situation. It will lead to increased unemployment for example, for persons with disabilities. I'm quite sure of that. What's a bit new this time is that some traditional tools, vocational training and other traditional labor market policy tools aren't available in the same way. So I think that we need to be a bit innovative and try to find new ways to address the problems that we face. But then, of course, activity and a lot of help for persons that are struggling to be a part of the labor market to find their ways forward. But we can also address what I think Stefan Trömmel was saying. We can see at the same time we can see that the structural changes that the labor market is going through digitalization and new technology creates new opportunities. We have to open opportunities and make it possible for persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups in the labor market to take part of the educational system to be relevant in the labor market.
Thank you so much. And now I got information that you're back. I hope now, Steve? Yeah, now we can hear you. Oh, I'm happy. So please, could you also share some of your reflections of what you heard today and your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been part of the study group, and a lot of the reflections today is a bit similar to some of the points made from the study group. But what I think is interesting is the build back better. That is our opportunity. That's really now we have. I'm also a part of some of the European work, and there's a lot of focus now. We really have to invest in society and rebuild and make new solutions for all. And we need to secure mainstreaming in that one. We need to make sure that they are not just investing in jobs or in new education, but they remember all the time that people for disabilities should have the same opportunities. It's really important for us to be active and aware now. And my biggest fear is also that this, as long as technology is used, there's an inclusive society. But what about those who cannot use the technology? Those who maybe do not, we can see in Denmark that there's a gap increasing in regards to education. That's a big issue. But also just in general, if you are not very skilled with technology, are you coming further and further apart from the labor market? It means that maybe someone like me who's quite good at technology, I will have better chance. But those who could do more, but who have the issues of using technology, we really have to invest in training them, giving them skills, and to find out and develop solutions where they might more easily use the technology available.
So thank you so much, because what you're saying is like we can see two parallel things happening at the same time. We can, on one hand, with all this new technology, we do see more inclusion, but we do actually also see more exclusion, because the past is so rapid right now. I would like to ask you one other question also. So, because from a human rights perspective, what do you see that the Nordic countries need to do? I mean, what can we do at the Nordic level? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have. If you have the CFD says a lot of beautiful words about prohibit discriminations on the basis of disability. And yet we see when we have studies like the ones mentioned today, that especially people with, for example, psychosocial disabilities, they are met with so much resistance in society. So we really have to do something about sharing all that people with disability can do and can contribute to society and to a workplace. That's really important. And it's both the employers, but it's also, as that was mentioned also earlier, if you have less of a network, you're more dependent on job centers, for example, to help you. And if the job centers think that, well, this one is a person with disability and she cannot do anything, it's even more difficult. So you really have to educate in all levels about their possibilities, including persons with disabilities themselves, to get a better understanding and knowledge and to show off their skills.
Because one thing I hear, I mean, you are saying as if, and before also, many of the researchers, they also said that what is really needed is actually change, a mind shift, and that there has to be a lot of awareness campaigns, because what actually happens is that we do have quite a lot of assistive technology, and we also have legislation often in place, but still it's not going fast enough. So, I actually want to ask you, Frederick, something, because you work on the global level, and one problem that many assistive technology companies face, I know this, is that there are different rules in different countries, and different rules on prescribing and distributing assistive devices. So very often, I mean, the whole assistive technology market, it's described as very complex. And since you are an internationally operating company, what obstacles do you see? And most of all, what can be done at the Nordic level to make this easier? Because, I mean, we are almost 150 or 200 people here listening today, and I think many people here are perhaps working in authorities or in the government. So what needs to be done on the Nordic level to make this easier, so that companies like you also can, with all this good technology that you have, work in a good way?
Sure. The big problem is actually two problems. The first one comes that the rules in the Nordic countries, they're pretty good, but the interpretation of the rules is very, very local. So if you're in Sweden, for example, you simply have to be lucky to live in the right region, because the implementation and the understanding, the knowledge of what your rights are is vastly different from one region to the other. Here I would say, in an international perspective, Norway stands out as the shining star, with NAV being one centralized unit, having one centralized methodology. So at least our perception is that regardless where you live in Norway, you're equally lucky. But if you go to Sweden, where we are headquartered, it's a whole different story. But that is not the big issue. The big issue is that if I'm not just a provider of assistive technology, I'm also an employer of a lot of people with special needs. And what probably is the common denominator of these boys and girls is that they have a super strong parent, typically mothers, or they've been lucky to meet with a therapist that happened to be interested in technology in the field. And that kind of became the springboard. If you, in most of the Nordic countries, if I'm not wrong, if you go to university for 4 or 5 years, become a speech language pathologist, you have a few hours of training or teaching about technology aids, and then nothing. If you go to Holland, in order to keep your license, you need to have continuing education, and you need to be kept up to speed on all the technological or also therapeutic developments. It's of course super dangerous if you are a person with disability. You have hopefully parents and you have friends, maybe someone else, but another super important interface is your therapist. If that therapist has no clue about the technological advancements, in the past 10, 15 years, well, then you're lost. And this is something we need to improve between countries, in countries, and there are only a few exceptions globally where you actually need to have some sort of continuing education. US is actually a very good example there.
Thank you so much, Frederick. I mean, I think you raise many important issues in this, but when we speak about the future of work, because I mean, there are all these conferences and all these initiatives all the time speaking about the future of the labor market. I mean, but not so often in those when there is like this positive view of the future of the labor market and technology, people with disabilities are even touched upon. Lars, what do you think it depends on? And first of all, how can we become Norway? I mean, you and I, we used to work at the Swedish Disability Ombudsman, so we want to know, how do we become better than Norway, of course?
Well, I think I need to be a bit more political than I can be to answer what I think about that. But then I think that I will start being quite political anyhow. In being the Swedish Disability Ombudsman, I wrote annual reports to the government. And the first report I wrote exactly 20 years ago, I started the report with saying, in free translation, Sweden is segregated. Sweden is segregated, and our pride prevents us from seeing that. And if I would have had the same position today, having the same opportunity to write that kind of report, I think I would have said the same thing. We are not. As a society, we are still struggling to see every part of society as part of the working life, and that is especially making it difficult for persons with disabilities. We have to be more broad-minded in creating opportunities as a society.
Okay. I know actually that there's a lot of questions now coming in from people listening. So I'm going to actually turn over to Jessica in Helsinki and ask you, could you join us so we can also hear some of the questions that have been coming in from participants?
Yes, here is the first one. Which role should disability organizations play in relation to AI development? Should they lobby politicians for new legislation, for example? What do you think?
Well, very good question. I think we should start with Yusuf. What do you think? What should be the role of disability organizations?
I think it's different ones. We have a really interesting, in Denmark, we have a good cooperation with the Danish Technical University, and also trying to inspire the students to think about technology leaving no one behind. So already when they are learning to be inspired by this and for hopefully for many years to come to go out in business and invent technologies which could help. So that's one part. Of course, you should always also have that talk with the government about it, know if there are new programs to advise. And then it's really important to help with the user role. So if you have researchers saying that, you know, you want to research some new AIs, do things, sometimes you need case persons, people you can talk with, have interactions, you know, find out if this is working or isn't it working. And that's also important to help with that part.
Thank you so much. I mean, the civil society and NGOs, they have very often, not at least an important role of pushing actually authorities forward. I want to ask you, Lars, about this because I mean, you have well changed hat many times, so to speak. Right now, you are working at the Public Employment Agency, but once upon a time, you were the chairman of the Swedish Disability Federation. So, what do you think is the most important role here for NGOs and for civil society?
Well, of course, to prioritize and try to seek out what issues or what questions to address. And I think, of course, that lobbying for assistive technology or IA solutions is one area where disability organizations can be or NGOs in general can play an important part, but you have to figure out if new legislation is the best way forward, or like we heard Siv say, is the cooperation with universities a better way forward. I think that is the most important thing to do as an NGO to prioritize and decide on what way to change society you think is the best way.
So do we have any more questions, Jessica?
Yes, we certainly do. Then what about engaging the labor market parties and through agreements work for a more inclusive work life?
Mm-hmm. So how should we work there with labor market parties of different kinds? What does the trade union should do?
Can I start? I think that is really important. Labor. When I said that we need to challenge a segregated structure, every part of society is responsible for the segregation, and I think that we need to address every part of society, and of course in Sweden the labor market, the way that we have organized our labor market makes it even more important to challenge that part of the structure as well, and work together with, not only challenge.
Does anybody else want to comment? Yeah, Fredrik?
Yeah. I think that we can, the institutions can start by what we say sometimes, eat your own dog food. Let's employ more people with disabilities within those institutions and let them be champions and let them really prove that just because I look different, talk different, move different, that disability is just something that's imaginary. I have fantastic skills behind that facade. And to some degree, I think COVID and everybody now working remote has leveled the playing field, at least for some of the user groups, because it's, we're all confined to our homes, which is actually the norm for a lot of users, at least of our products and tools. But start by employing them yourselves, and because it's so easy to read a report and think that you understand, not until you really have a colleague yourself will that curtain be opened up.
Thank you, Fredrik. That was almost a hallelujah moment. Eat your own dog food. Sif, what do you want to add?
I wanted to add that we really need also, we have had difficulties in Denmark at some point to engage the labor unions, because sometimes it's a bit like, it's not our members, it's a special interest and we're not so concerned with it. But what we really need to do is also to have people with disabilities become part of the labor unions, become active, speaking up. And we can see, have a really great case in Denmark, a young woman with CP who has been so active. I can see how many minds she's changed inside the labor unions, because they suddenly see, well, okay, it's also our concern, she's a colleague, she's a great woman, why should there be so many obstacles for her? So sometimes we have to both interact with them from outside as disability organizations, saying, how can we work together on this topic? But it's also important to have someone from the inside speaking out, saying this is important.
Jessica, do we have any more questions?
Yes, this is the last one. I think we already talked a bit about it, but I think this is really important. How can we get more employers to focus more on what people can do? This comment is, I am sure that we who have disabilities develop skills that, thanks to our disabilities, would contribute a lot to companies and organizations.
Does anybody want to comment on that?
I would love to. It's so important. And again, I think we have to bring out the really good cases where we show that people with disability can contribute so much to society. And of course, you have people with disability on all levels in the organizations, but sometimes I've heard employers say, well, I don't have room for any more with disabilities right now because I don't need anyone in the reception area. And it's a bit like, well, this is the only place where they can perform. But it's not. It's all over the organization. You can have really high skills. You can have people in the reception area. You could have people doing practical work. People with disability are all different types, have all types of education. But there's a lack of awareness. So we really have to raise some awareness. And again, to use a good example, so when you have a colleague who have a disability, who has done great work, to share it. Because often it's when you have had your first employee with a disability, it's easier to get the second one and the third one because you found out, well, what was the issue? It's not an issue.
I automatically think I used to work for a couple of years with responsibility for anti-discrimination against people with disabilities, amongst other things, for the Swedish Army. And I remembered a lot when, for a long time, there was like a common understanding that it's impossible to have any kind of disability to work for the Swedish Army. And then what was really needed was really positive examples about eating your own dog food. And I said, well, have you looked at Great Britain, for example, where you do have people, for example, working with intelligence, etc. So you really need good examples. So I want to end up with asking you a last question. It really stuck to me, this eat your own dog food. So if you want to leave a last message for the people listening today, what can we do so that digitalization, assistive technology, AI and all these other technology actually becomes something, a possibility? So like, do you have one positive thing to leave us with as a last advice today? Who feels like starting?
I can start.
Yeah.
We're 200 people on this call, and I think we are dog food eaters, all of us. So we don't have to kind of preach to the choir. But it actually starts with the grassroots by showing more concrete examples, not necessarily having campaigns on billboards, but actually getting to know a person who communicates in a different way, who is, sees or hears in a different way. And we need those examples out there, and we need people to actually get to know them, not read about them. Because and this is a human thing, right? If you don't know anyone from Africa, then you probably have preconceived thoughts about people from Africa. And it's the same thing about the prejudice about people with disabilities. And we, in this group, need to be grassroots movement about actually pushing it out there. Let's not hide behind curtains, but be, a little bit provocative. And for all of us who employ people who are engaged in this, well, do it for the sake of doing it, because it will be fantastic for the company or the organization that you represent as well. And that's how we solve it, not by a one quick fix.
Thank you so much, Fredrik. Sif, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities, mainstreaming, a lot of possibilities, developing technology, and then always we have to bear in mind the gap. so that we don't increase the gap for those who have more difficulties using technology, those who have a poorer education, all those that really make sure that it's not up to themselves to make the change, but you can give a helping hand and make sure that everyone is included.
And Lars, some final words?
I think that it would be nicer if Fredrik would have ended. He's got his better one-liners than I have. But I think what we need to see is that there are actually some developments. Even though I can see that we are discussing basically a few things that we discussed when I started to work in this field some 25 years ago. But there are developments, and we need to see opportunities in the new development. So be optimistic and work hard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Lars, to Fredrik, and to Sif, and of course also to you, Jessica. And now we've actually come to the end of the day. It's been a really interesting day. And I would like to ask Lars to come up here next to me. Thank you. Lars, what are your reflections after listening today?
Well, there are so many things that interesting things, and there are so many layers that have been very open up, and it's difficult to summarize the whole discussion, but I think we have learned a lot. I think also this is not a quick fix technology, but it's an important step forward. And I think also that we can say that future work discussion in general, people with disability have been quite invisible in that discussion. And I think this webinar have shown how much things are needed to put up on the agenda. So yes, I'm very happy for this, and so I think it would have been very fruitful.
And this whole seminar, it will also, you will be able to watch it also afterwards. It will be text-edited and will be at the Nordic Welfare Center's homepage. We really want to thank all of you that have been joining us this morning. I want to thank from me, and I would like to hand over to you, Lars, if you would like to say some last words from the Nordic, from you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank all the speakers and the panelists for your contribution. And thank you very much for this. And I also want to thank you, Hanna, who have led this seminar and webinar with a really steady way. I want to thank Levande Video, the company who have helped with the streaming, the writing interpreters. But at last, I want to thank you, all of you who have listened to this webinar. Thank you.